The morning it all began, the dog barked only once. A low, uncertain sound that sliced through the fog like a question no one wanted to answer. It was one of those gray Midwestern mornings that seemed stitched together from damp mist and regret. The town of Millstone, population 4,237 on the welcome sign and probably fewer if you counted the ones who wanted to leave, was slowly waking up. The air smelled faintly of rain and distant bacon. Somewhere a lawnmower coughed to life, as if even the machines were reluctant to start another Tuesday. Detective Jack Rourke, 47, leaned on his porch railing, coffee in hand, wearing the same denim jacket he'd owned since the Clinton years. His hair was more salt than pepper now. His face lined in ways that told the story of too many cases solved and too few hearts mended. At his feet sat Bailey, a golden retriever with eyes too kind for the things they'd both seen. She watched the mist drift across the yard with the alert stillness of someone who noticed everything, the kind of noticing that had saved Jack more than once. Jack took a slow sip of coffee. "You ever think about retirement, girl?" he asked. Bailey tilted her head. Her tail thumped once against the porch. "Yeah," he sighed. "Me neither." Millstone wasn't the kind of town that needed detectives anymore. Or at least it liked to think so. Jack had been on the county force for over 20 years, but after the Henderson case, the one that went cold and stayed that way, he'd traded badge and sirens for freelance investigative work. Small jobs, missing dogs, lost inheritances, background checks for divorce lawyers. Not glamorous, but it kept the lights on and the ghosts quiet. At least most of them. Bailey's ears flicked toward the edge of the yard. Jack followed her gaze. An old man walking across the street, hunched, pushing a bicycle with one flat tire. Old Clarence Milton, retired postman, lived alone since his wife passed in '09. He waved half-heartedly. Jack raised his coffee cup in reply. That's how things worked in Millstone. You didn't talk much, you just nodded and pretended silence meant everything was fine. Except that morning, Clarence stopped at the gate. "Morning, Jack," he called out. "You got a minute?" Jack squinted at him. "Sure. You all right?" Clarence hesitated, gripping the handlebar tight. "Found something out by the creek yesterday. Figured I oughta tell somebody who still gives a damn." Jack's brow furrowed. Bailey stood up, tail stiff. "What kind of something?" Jack asked. Clarence's eyes shifted toward the woods beyond Jack's yard. A tangled mess of oaks, maples, and secrets. "An old chain," he said, "and a collar, half buried in the mud. Looked like it had been there a long time." Jack set his coffee down slowly. Bailey gave a low whine. "A collar?" "Yeah," Clarence nodded. "Leather, cracked, metal tag still on it. Couldn't make out the name, though. Figured it belonged to a dog." Jack felt something cold crawl up the back of his neck. There were 1,000 things you could find in Millstone's woods. Beer cans, old traps, rusted tools. But an old collar didn't feel like just trash. Not today. Not with Bailey staring into the mist like she saw something he couldn't. "Show me," Jack said. The creek was 2 miles south of town, running shallow and brown beneath a broken wooden bridge that hadn't seen a car since the Eisenhower administration. Clarence led the way, muttering about how kids had stopped fishing here because the fish probably had more mercury than brains. Jack followed, Bailey trotting silently at his heel. The forest was still soaked from last night's rain. Each step sank with a soft squelch. Sunlight bled weakly through the canopy, painting everything in washed-out gold. "There," Clarence pointed, near a mossy stump. Jack crouched down. Half buried in the mud was a rusted chain, coiled like a snake. One end snapped. Beside it, the faint outline of a leather collar, its tag caked with dirt. He brushed it gently. The metal glinted. A name, faint but legible, Buddy. Bailey leaned closer, sniffing hard. Then she stiffened. A soft growl rumbled in her chest. Jack looked around. "Easy, girl." The forest was silent except for the trickle of water. But Jack had learned long ago that silence didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it meant the truth was holding its breath. He pocketed the tag carefully. "Thanks, Clarence. I'll check it out." Clarence frowned. "You think it means something?" Jack stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. Everything means something. It's just a matter of when it starts talking. Back home, Jack cleaned the tag under warm water. The letters stood out clearer now. Buddy, 555 to 79. The last digits were worn away. He ran the name through his old case notes. Dozens of lost pet reports. One caught his eye. March 2008. Missing dog, golden retriever. Name, Buddy. Owner, Ellen Harper. He froze. That name hadn't crossed his mind in years. Ellen Harper, the widow who'd vanished without a trace 6 months after reporting her dog missing. Case ruled voluntary disappearance. Jack never believed that. Bailey watched him from across the room, head resting on her paws, eyes following his every move. Looks like we're reopening a file, partner, Jack murmured. Bailey's tail thumped softly. He smiled, just barely. Yeah, I missed this too. The rest of that day felt off balance, like the air was heavier than usual. Jack drove out to the old Harper property on the outskirts of town, what was left of it. A for sale sign leaned crooked in the yard, faded by years of sun and neglect. The house itself was a 2-story farmhouse, paint peeled down to raw wood, windows fogged with dust. Bailey jumped out of the truck, nose to the ground immediately. Jack followed the cracked stone path to the porch. Each step groaned like it was remembering footsteps that never came back. He tried the front door. Locked. Around the back, though, a small window half broken, a jagged hole big enough for a hand. Figures, Jack muttered. He slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old paper. Furniture still sat where it had been left. A couch covered in a sheet. A lamp tilted like it was tired of standing. Bailey padded quietly behind him, sniffing the corners. Her tail flicked once, then stilled. She stopped near the back door, the one leading to the yard. Her ears perked. Then slowly, she sat down. Jack frowned. What is it? Bailey looked up at him, then back at the door. A low, almost mournful sound left her throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. He reached for the knob. Creaked open. Outside, the backyard had long been swallowed by weeds. But in the center, beneath an old apple tree, was a patch of dirt that looked different, newer. Jack's pulse quickened. Bailey stood beside him, silent. The wind moved through the branches like a whisper. Jack took a deep breath. Guess we'll need a shovel. By dusk, the yard was a mess of overturned soil and old memories. Jack's shovel hit something hard. Not metal, wood. A box. Small, weathered. He pried it open carefully. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a stack of photographs and something else. A small cassette tape, labeled in faded ink, For the Truth. Jack's hands trembled slightly. Bailey leaned close, her nose brushing the box. He looked at her. You've got one hell of a nose, you know that? She wagged once, solemnly. Jack laughed softly. Yeah, I know. You don't do jokes. He stared down at the tape. He hadn't seen one of these since the 90s. Well, he said, pocketing it. Guess it's time to visit the evidence room. Bailey gave a short, approving bark, the second sound she'd made all day. And that's when it hit Jack. The dog barked only when it mattered. The next morning broke too bright for the kind of day it was meant to be. Sunlight hit the chipped blinds in Jack Rourke's office like interrogation lights, striping the room in tired gold and dust. Bailey lay on the floor, chin on her paws, watching her human make war with an ancient cassette player he'd dug out of a closet labeled Evidence and Bad Decisions. Come on, you old bastard, Jack muttered, tapping the play button with a pen. If you eat this tape, I swear I'll trade you for a toaster. Bailey huffed, the kind of sigh that said she'd seen this movie before. The machine finally wheezed, clicked, and began to spin. A hiss filled the air, followed by a voice. Faint, female, trembling. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. Jack froze. My name is Ellen Harper. I don't know who to trust anymore. They said Buddy ran away, but he didn't. He was taken. And if I disappear, it's because of what I found in those files. The tape crackled. Bailey lifted her head, ears twitching. It started with the land deal, The new highway project. They're burying more than money out there. Please, if anyone finds this, tell Jack Rourke. Tell him I was right. Click. End of tape. Silence thick enough to choke on. Jack stared at the machine, his coffee forgotten and cold. Ellen Harper's voice, after 17 years, still sounded like guilt. Bailey stood and rested her chin on his knee, eyes steady. Yeah, Jack murmured. I heard it too. He rewound the tape, this time writing down every word. When he was done, he sat back and let the memories wash over him. The Harper case, the missing dog, the whispers about the county development board, the construction firm that folded overnight after Ellen vanished. It had all been filed under unsolved. Now it was breathing again. Jack's first stop was City Hall, or what passed for it. A squat, beige brick building that smelled faintly of copy toner and denial. The receptionist, Janine, was a 60-something woman who ran the front desk like a warlord runs an empire. "Morning, Janine," Jack said, flashing a tired grin. She squinted. "If you're here to renew your dog license, you're 6 months late and 1 apology short." Bailey wagged once. "Not today. Need to look at the old zoning records for the Harper property." Janine pursed her lips. "Zoning records? That's a fancy way to say, I'm about to piss off the mayor. Isn't it?" Jack grinned. "Maybe just a little." 10 minutes later, he was in the dusty basement archives flipping through binders thick with old maps. Bailey sniffed the corners, occasionally sneezing at the dust. There it was, the 2008 Millstone Development Plan. Highlighted in yellow, the parcel labeled Harper Farm. Next to it, scribbled in pen, approved by R. DeLuca. Jack frowned. Raymond DeLuca, the current mayor. Back then, he'd been the county commissioner. Smooth talker, liked to describe himself as a man of progress. Jack always thought he was more of a man of loopholes. Bailey pawed at the edge of the map, revealing another sheet underneath. A survey report showing chemical waste testing near the same property. Stamped confidential. "Looks like we just found our first nail, partner," Jack whispered. "Now we see whose coffin it fits." That afternoon, the mayor's office smelled of cologne and money. Mayor Ray DeLuca stood by the window, mid-50s, tan year-round, teeth a little too perfect for a man who claimed to have grown up poor. "Jack Rourke," he said, turning with a politician's smile. "To what do I owe this nostalgic surprise?" Jack handed him a photo from the box. Ellen Harper standing with Buddy, smiling. "You remember her?" DeLuca's eyes flicked to the picture, then back. "Of course. Tragic case. Woman had issues." "Funny," Jack said. "Her issues left behind a tape with your signature on a land deal that smells like fertilizer and fraud." DeLuca's smile didn't waver, but the air shifted. "You always did have a way with words, Rourke. Still chasing ghosts, I see." Bailey, sitting at Jack's feet, let out a quiet rumble, just enough to make DeLuca glance down. "Cute dog," he said tightly. "Smart too," Jack replied. "She can tell when someone's lying. She's doing it right now." DeLuca chuckled, but his eyes had gone cold. "Careful, detective. You start digging into the past, you might not like what you unearth." Jack smiled thinly. "That's funny. I was just in Ellen Harper's backyard. Guess what I found there?" DeLuca's jaw flexed. "If you had any sense, you'd stop looking." "Sense isn't really my brand." Bailey barked once. Sharp, deliberate, the same way she had by the creek. For a second, the mayor actually stepped back. Back at the truck, Jack leaned against the door, rubbing his temples. "Well, that went exactly as bad as expected." Bailey licked his hand. "Yeah, I know. He's hiding something. Probably a whole landfill's worth." He started the engine. The old Chevy coughed awake, headlights flickering. They drove toward the edge of town, where the old highway construction site still lay abandoned. Half-finished roads disappearing into weeds, signs bleached white by the sun. Bailey's nose twitched as soon as they stepped out. She pulled hard on the leash, leading Jack toward a row of collapsed barriers. There, half buried under gravel, was a metal object, a small license plate tag from a construction vehicle. The serial number matched a company that went out of business right after Ellen's disappearance. "Good girl," Jack said softly. "You're finding things faster than I can lie to the mayor." Bailey wagged, tongue out, eyes shining. For a moment, amid the dust and ghosts, she looked impossibly alive, like hope wearing fur. Then her tail stiffened again. She barked once, staring into the trees. Jack followed her gaze. Someone moved in the shadows. "Hey!" he shouted. A figure bolted. Male, wearing a dark hoodie, running hard toward the forest line. Jack dropped the leash. "Stay, Bailey," he chased, breath burning, boots slapping dirt. The man was fast, knew the terrain. Branches clawed at Jack's sleeves as they wove through trees and over fallen logs. Finally, near the old quarry fence, the man slipped, stumbled. Jack lunged, tackling him to the ground. The man thrashed. Jack yanked off the hood and froze. It was Deputy Mike Talbot, his former partner. "Jesus, Mike," Jack gasped. "You trying to give me a heart attack?" Talbot's face was pale, eyes wide. "You shouldn't be here, Jack." "Yeah, I'm getting that a lot lately." Talbot struggled free, brushing off dirt. "You don't understand. You start poking that case again, it's not just you on the line. They're watching everyone." "Who's they?" But before he could answer, Talbot's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face went gray. "I can't talk here," he muttered. "Meet me tonight. The old diner. 9 p.m. Then he was gone, disappearing into the woods like a guilty shadow. Jack stood there a moment, heart pounding. Then he heard soft paws behind him. Bailey trotted up, leash dragging, eyes full of reproach. "Yeah, I know," Jack panted. "You said stay." "I didn't." She licked his hand. Forgiveness, silent but complete. That night, Rain returned to Millstone. The old diner sat on Route 12, its neon sign flickering between eat and at. Jack parked across the street, headlights off. Bailey watched from the passenger seat, nose pressed to the glass. Inside, Talbot was already there, sitting in the corner booth, nervously stirring his coffee. Jack slid in opposite him. "You look like hell," Jack said. Talbot snorted. "You should see the mirror." The waitress, a tired-looking woman named Marla, dropped 2 refills without asking. Bailey thumped her tail against the seat. She knew Marla's handouts were legendary. "Talk," Jack said. Talbot hesitated. Back then, when Ellen disappeared, it wasn't just a missing persons case. DeLuca made calls, said to leave it alone, that the feds were handling it. They weren't. No, it was the construction company Midwest Infrastructure Group. They were dumping chemical waste on private land, covering it with fake soil tests. Ellen found the reports. Buddy must have gotten into one of the contaminated zones, that's why he got sick, ran off. She traced it back to them. Jack felt his stomach twist. "And when she told someone, they made her disappear," Talbot said quietly. "And DeLuca made it go away." Jack leaned back, the weight of years pressing down. Bailey's reflection stared at him from the window, eyes steady, patient. "You've been sitting on this for 17 years? Jack said. "I had a kid," Talbot muttered. "Mortgage, threats. They don't stop at firing you, Jack. They ruin you." Jack's voice dropped. "So why now?" Talbot looked up. "Because someone's digging again. Ellen's files. The chain, the collar, those weren't found by accident. Someone wants this case reopened, or someone wants it buried again." Before Jack could answer, a car screeched outside. Headlights flared through the window, blinding white. Then bang! The front window shattered. Talbot jerked, eyes wide, a red bloom spreading across his shirt. Jack dove to the floor. Bailey barked, ferocious. A sound that didn't belong in a diner full of chipped mugs and half-eaten pie. By the time Jack looked up, the car was gone, taillights disappearing into the rain. He crawled to Talbot, pressing a napkin to the wound. "Stay with me, Mike." Talbot's eyes fluttered. He grabbed Jack's arm weakly. They were right. The dog. The dog was the key. Then his hand fell limp. Bailey whimpered softly. Outside, the rain fell harder. The neon sign buzzed and died. That night, Jack sat in his truck behind the diner, drenched and shaking. The tape, the land deal, the collar, it all connected. Ellen hadn't just found corruption. She'd found a network. And now Talbot was dead. He looked at Bailey, her fur soaked, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "Looks like we're in deep, partner." Bailey leaned against him, warm and alive, the only steady thing in a town that suddenly wasn't. Jack started the engine. The road ahead shimmered with rain, vanishing into darkness. He drove on anyway, because sometimes the only way out of the silence is through it. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It came down in steady, unforgiving sheets, washing the dust off rooftops, the dirt off streets, and maybe, Jack Rourke thought grimly, the truth out into the open. By the third morning, the whole town of Millstone looked like it had been dunked in melancholy. Storefront windows fogged over. The diner's open sign hung lopsided and dark. And in the corner booth where Mike Talbot had bled out, someone had taped a cardboard patch over the hole in the glass. The kind of small-town fix that said, "Let's pretend it didn't happen." But Jack couldn't pretend. Neither could Bailey. She sat in the passenger seat of the truck, chin on the window, eyes tracking every passerby like she expected another bullet to come from the rain. "Don't worry," Jack muttered, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "We're not giving them a second shot." He'd spent the night scrubbing Talbot's blood from his sleeves, replaying every second of that conversation. The dog was the key. Bailey, the collar, the tape, the chemical waste. It all fit, almost. He needed one more piece. Ellen Harper's missing files. And there was only one person who might know where they were. Ellen's younger sister, Ruth Harper Wilson, lived 30 miles north, in a town called Maple Hollow. Population, tractors. Jack had called ahead, gotten no answer, then driven there anyway. When you're chasing ghosts, politeness just slows you down. Ruth answered the door in paint-stained overalls and suspicion. She was in her early 40s now, lines of both laughter and loss on her face. "Detective Rourke," she said flatly. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." Jack took off his hat, nodding. "Didn't think I'd be back either." Bailey wagged once, offering her silent hello. Ruth glanced at the dog. "You replaced Buddy?" Jack's voice softened. "Bailey's her own soul. But she found something out by the old property." He held out the tag Buddy. Ruth stared at it for a long time, her lips trembling just enough to betray years of held-back grief. "Where?" "By the creek near the farm. And there's more. I think Ellen left evidence behind. Proof she found something big." Ruth's eyes hardened. "Then you better come in." Inside, Ruth's house was a mosaic of chaos and warmth. Half-finished canvases, coffee mugs doubling as brush jars, and a cat that glared at Bailey like she was personally responsible for every bad life decision it had ever made. "She was scared," Ruth said, pacing. "The week before she vanished, Ellen called me twice. Said she'd finally connected the dots. Wouldn't tell me what that meant. Just said if anything happened, I should look in her old studio." "Studio?" Ruth nodded toward the window. "She rented a space downtown. Still there. I pay the storage fees every year. Couldn't bring myself to clean it out." Jack exhaled slowly. "Let's go." Ellen Harper's art studio sat above a defunct bakery, its sign still faintly readable, "Millstone Bread, rising since '72. The smell of yeast had long been replaced by dust and regret. Jack and Ruth climbed the narrow stairs, Bailey close behind. The door creaked open to reveal a room frozen in time. Canvases stacked against the wall, an old radio, dried paint tubes, and a bulletin board littered with faded newspaper clippings. Ruth's hand shook as she switched on the light. "I haven't been up here since—" She didn't finish. Bailey padded forward, sniffing along the baseboards. Her tail twitched once, then twice, her signal that something didn't fit. Jack followed her nose to a low cabinet. He pulled. Stuck. Rusted. He kicked it open. Inside, a metal lockbox. Ruth gasped. That was hers. Jack pried it open. Inside, a stack of documents, neatly bundled in rubber bands, and a small flash drive taped to the underside of the lid. He flipped through the pages, property test results, internal memos from Midwest Infrastructure Group, payments authorized by R. DeLuca. Each page felt heavier than the last. Bailey gave a quiet growl. Her gaze had fixed on the window. Jack turned and froze. Across the street, parked by a fire hydrant, was a black SUV. Engine running. 2 figures inside. Watching. "Ruth," Jack said quietly. "Grab the files." She didn't ask why. She'd seen enough to know. They hurried down the stairs, the papers clutched to Jack's chest, Bailey close behind. By the time they hit the street, the SUV's door swung open. A man stepped out. Tall, shaved head, dark suit that didn't belong anywhere near Millstone. Jack didn't wait for introductions. "Run!" Ruth sprinted for the truck. Jack followed, ducking low as a gunshot shattered the air. The bullets struck the bakery sign, scattering wooden crumbs into the rain. Bailey barked, fierce, unflinching, as Jack threw open the driver's door and hit the gas. Tires screamed, and they tore through the narrow street, the SUV close behind. The chase ripped through the outskirts of town, past cornfields blurred into gray streaks by the rain. Jack's truck rattled like it might fall apart, but it still had enough fight left, like its driver. Bailey stood braced between the seats, watching the rear window, lips curled in a soundless snarl. "Don't even think about it," Jack muttered, swerving onto a dirt road. "I'm not letting some suit turn us into roadkill." Ruth clutched the files to her chest. "Who are they?" "Men who don't like being caught dumping poison," Jack said grimly. "And they probably work for the same people who made your sister disappear." A gun flashed behind them. A shot cracked through the back window, spraying glass. Bailey barked, crouched low. Jack yanked the wheel, veering into the woods. Branches whipped the sides of the truck. Mud sprayed. The SUV followed, but it was built for highways, not heart. After half a mile of rough terrain, the truck burst through onto an old service road. The SUV hit a rut, spun, and slammed sideways into a tree. Jack didn't look back. When the road leveled out again, he finally slowed. Ruth was pale, gripping the seat. "You okay?" She nodded shakily. "What now?" Jack glanced at the files. "Now we find someone who can make this official." He turned to Bailey. "And you saved our asses again." Bailey panted, tail thumping weakly, as if to say, all in a day's work. They parked at a motel outside town, one of those places where the ice machine had been broken longer than the manager had been alive. Ruth spread the documents across the bedspread. Jack hooked the flash drive to his laptop. A folder opened. Dozens of photos, invoices, scanned reports. One video file labeled Proof. Jack clicked. The footage was grainy, shot at night. It showed men in reflective vests dumping black barrels into a pit near the old Harper property. Then headlights. Ellen's voice whispered from behind the camera. "They're here. Oh my God. They saw me." Static. Then nothing. Ruth covered her mouth. Jack sat back, silent. The rain drummed on the roof like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. "They killed her," Ruth whispered. Jack nodded slowly. "And buried the evidence." Literally. Bailey stood, walked over to the table, and pawed at one of the maps, the chemical dump site. Her paw landed squarely on a section marked Reclaimed Soil Project. Jack frowned. "You think?" He looked at Ruth. "Tomorrow we dig." Later, after Ruth fell asleep, Jack sat outside under the motel awning, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. He hadn't smoked in years, not since Ellen's case. Bailey lay beside him, chin on her paws, watching the rain fall in silver lines. 17 years, Jack murmured. "And it took you to break it open." Bailey looked up, tail twitching once. He smiled faintly. "Don't let it go to your head, okay?" The humor faded. His eyes drifted to the horizon, the direction of the Harper property. The past waited there, patient as the grave. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we finish it." Bailey leaned against him, silent but certain. At dawn, the rain stopped. The world smelled of mud and something electric, that hush before everything changes. Jack parked the truck by the Harper Creek. Ruth joined him, shovel in hand. Bailey trotted ahead, nose down, leading them toward the same apple tree from before. She stopped, looked up at Jack, then scratched at the ground. "Right here?" Jack asked. Bailey barked once. They dug. For an hour. 2. The dirt was dense, clinging. Then Jack's shovel hit something solid. Wood. He dropped to his knees, clawing away the mud. It wasn't a coffin. It was a barrel, sealed tight, marked with the same industrial code from the files. He pried it open. The stench hit first chemical and decay. Inside were plastic folders, melted and warped, but still legible. Among them, a small waterproof pouch. Inside that, a USB drive, labeled Final Evidence. Ruth's hands shook. "She left this for you." Jack nodded, unable to speak. Then movement in the trees. Bailey barked, sharp, urgent. Jack spun. 2 men emerged from the woods, rifles raised. "Drop it, Rourke," one shouted. "You don't know what you're playing with." Jack glanced at Ruth. "Run." She bolted toward the truck. Jack stood his ground, shovel in hand. Bailey growled, low and steady. "Last chance, detective," the man warned. Jack smiled coldly. "You boys ever try arresting a conscience?" He swung. The shovel cracked against the rifle, sending it spinning. Bailey lunged, teeth flashing. Fast, fierce, fearless. She hit the second man's arm, clamping down. He yelled, stumbling. Jack grabbed the drive, turned, a shot rang out. Bailey yelped. Time froze. Jack's heart dropped through the mud. "Bailey!" She staggered, then collapsed beside the tree. The men fled, panicked, shouting into radios. Jack barely heard them. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling over her fur. "No, no, no, no." Her chest rose shallow. Blood stained the mud. Her eyes met his, calm, trusting. "Stay with me, girl. Please." The sound of sirens rose in the distance. Ruth must have called for help. Bailey blinked once, slow, as if saying it's okay. Jack pressed his forehead to hers. The world blurred with rain again. Hours later, at Millstone General Hospital, Jack sat in the waiting room, mud still streaking his boots. Ruth handed him coffee he didn't drink. "She'll make it," Ruth said softly. "They said the bullet missed anything vital." Jack exhaled shakily, nodding. On the table beside him, the flash drive sat sealed in an evidence bag. The police chief had taken his statement, pale as chalk. The FBI had already arrived, the files, the video, the barrel. Everything had blown open like a mine. Mayor DeLuca had been taken into custody for questioning. And for the first time in 17 years, Ellen Harper's name was spoken in town without a whisper. Bailey stirred behind the door of the vet's emergency ward. Her tail tapped weakly, the sound of victory wrapped in fur. Jack smiled through the exhaustion. "You did it, girl," he whispered. "You finally broke the silence." Millstone woke up quieter than usual. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns, not through headlines or broadcasts, but through the murmurs of baristas, mechanics, and old men at the diner. The mayor was in custody. The Harper case was reopened. And the dog that cracked it all was still fighting for her life in the vet's ward. Outside the hospital, a row of local news vans lined the curb. It was the first time Millstone had ever made national headlines, and no one was sure if they were proud or ashamed. Jack Rourke sat on the edge of the hospital bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He hadn't slept. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. The old ache in his shoulder, a reminder from a case long past, flared again, as if his body couldn't decide whether to heal or hurt. Bailey lay beside him, her torso wrapped in gauze, eyes heavy but awake. The vet said she'd pulled through, strong heart, strong will. A survivor. Jack brushed her head gently. "Guess we're both too stubborn to quit, huh?" Bailey's tail thumped once, slow but steady. He smiled, small, tired, but real. "You and me, partner." By noon, the Millstone Town Hall was surrounded by reporters. Inside, the county attorney held a press conference. Behind her, boxes of seized documents were stacked like towers of guilt. Jack stood in the back, Ruth at his side. Neither wanted the spotlight, but both needed to hear it said, out loud, official, undeniable. Following new evidence, the attorney announced, Mayor Richard DeLuca, along with senior officials of Midwest Infrastructure Group, have been charged with environmental violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice related to the disappearance of investigative journalist Ellen Harper in 2008. A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Thanks to a recent discovery by Detective Jack Rourke, and, it seems, his remarkably perceptive K-9 justice will finally move forward. Jack's jaw tightened at the applause. He didn't want it. Ellen Harper should have been there to hear it herself. He slipped out quietly before the reporters could turn their lenses toward him. Outside, the sun had broken through for the first time in days. The rain-washed streets gleamed. The air smelled like new beginnings and wet earth. Bailey sat waiting in the truck, head tilted, watching him like she knew every unspoken thought. Jack opened the door, sliding in beside her. You ready to go home? Her tongue lolled out answer enough. They drove back to the Harper property, quiet now, cordoned off with police tape and markers. The apple tree stood alone in the clearing, branches dripping light instead of rain. Jack knelt beside the roots, where the ground was still torn from the dig. He placed a small brass tag there, Buddy, cleaned, polished, and shining again. Ruth stood a few feet away, tears in her eyes. She'd be grateful, she whispered, not just for finding the truth, but for caring. Jack didn't look up. I owed her that much. Bailey sniffed at the base of the tree, then sat, head bowed. It wasn't sadness. It was reverence. The way only animals seem to understand loss without needing words. Let's plant something here, Ruth said. Something that grows. Jack nodded. Yeah, something that lasts. They pressed a young sapling into the earth beside the apple tree, a small gesture against years of silence. Bailey pawed at the soil, tail wagging faintly, helping as if she understood what it meant. When they were done, Ruth hugged him, awkward but warm. You gave her back to me. Jack shook his head. No, she gave herself back. We just listened. Weeks passed. Millstone changed in quiet, stubborn ways. The chemical waste was cleaned. The plant shut down. New jobs opened. The diner reopened its window with a new pane, and a photo of Bailey taped to the counter with the caption, Local hero, no autographs, please. Jack pretended to hate the attention, but the truth was, every time he saw that photo, he smiled. Bailey healed faster than the doctors predicted. The scar on her side became a badge of honor, the kind of mark that told a story no one could ever take from her. They went back to morning walks by the lake, though sometimes Jack still paused at the sight of the water, remembering the night everything came undone. Funny, he'd say quietly, tossing a stick. All these years chasing answers, and it was you who found them. Bailey fetched the stick, brought it back, dropped it at his feet with that look. The one that said you'd still be lost without me. Yeah, he said, scratching behind her ear. I know. One afternoon, a young journalist from the Chicago Tribune came to town. She wanted to interview Jack, the detective who solved Millstone's ghost story. He refused 3 times before finally giving in. They met at the diner. She was eager, sharp-eyed, full of questions. Detective Rourke, how does it feel to finally close a case that haunted this town for nearly 2 decades? Jack stirred his coffee. Feels like overdue homework finally turned in. And your partner? She said, nodding toward Bailey curled up under the table. Jack smiled faintly. She's the better half of this operation. I just follow her lead. The journalist grinned. They say she saved your life. Jack shrugged. I'd call it even. Do you think she knew what she was doing? That she was solving something bigger? Jack looked down at Bailey. She didn't care about the case. She cared about me. That's what made her brave. The journalist typed something quickly, then said, if you had to sum it up, what this case means to you, what would you say? Jack thought for a long moment. His reflection rippled in his coffee. Then softly, that sometimes the quietest souls hear the loudest truths. That night, Jack sat on his porch, boots off, beer in hand. Bailey lay stretched across the wooden boards, her head on his shoe. The crickets were back. The air was thick with the smell of pine and the hum of life returning to normal. From his chair, Jack could see the faint glow of the Harper property's new memorial light, a soft lantern placed beneath the apple tree, shining like a promise kept. He took a sip of beer. "We did good, Bailey." Her tail flicked once, sleepy approval. He leaned back, letting the quiet fill in where grief once lived. There was no grand speech, no triumphant soundtrack, just the sound of a dog breathing beside a man who finally stopped running from ghosts. Above them, stars spread across the sky like a reopened wound finally closing. Bailey stirred once, resting her head closer to his leg. Jack smiled. "Chained in silence, huh? Guess we finally broke the chain." The porch light flickered, the crickets sang, and somewhere in the dark fields beyond, the wind carried the faintest sound. Not sorrow, not fear, but peace. Thank you for following the story with me until the end. This story isn't just about solving a mystery. It's about loyalty, courage, and the quiet heroes who refuse to give up when the world stops listening. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep creating meaningful stories that celebrate humanity in all its raw, imperfect beauty. Leave a comment and tell us what your definition of a silent hero is. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of a loyal heart. See you in the next story.